You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media. It's our time with the Islamic Careline, and today we are taking a look at women's health through the different stages of life. Mental health encompasses physical, psychological, and a social well being. It influences cognition, perception, and behavior. It also determines how an individual handles stress, interpersonal relationships, and decision making. Mental disorders can affect women and men differently. Some disorders are more common in women, and there are also certain types of disorders that are unique to women. And here to tell us more is Shuhaida Adam, social worker at Islamic Careline. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shuhaida. Shukran for joining me.
Walaikum salam, walaikum salam. Wonderful to be here. Happy Women's Month to you and all the ladies at Salam Media. And that's, I think, why I also decided to focus on this topic. Just want to let's unpack what's the state of women, what's going on in our lives today. And like you rightly introduced, mental health it's a driving force behind who we
Mm.
are. So we won't necessarily be able to function if our mental health is not at optimum performance. Okay, at optimum well-being, a state of well-being, it doesn't just come about. Like you said, there's so many factors that contribute to our mental health. It's our physiological factors, our social factors, um, financial factors, family support. All of this can contribute to our mental health. So it's very important that we stay in tune with how we are, with what can possibly affect us, and what can we do about it if things are not going so well. So let's look just a little bit at, like you said, there's certain mental health disorders that actually, it may have the same name, but how it manifests itself in men and women can be quite different. And if you look from childhood already, oftentimes the input we put into our children, the way we raise our children also, it starts from there. Oftentimes the responsibility we put on young children, girl child gets more responsibility than the boy child in the home. Um, Even if I go a little bit back, when we look at stages of development also. So when our children are growing up, our infants, our toddlers, our preschoolers, as they are expected to master certain tasks according to their age, um, we often have different expectations of children, and we show our concern differently for the boy child and the girl child. So what we find then is that when girls are struggling with their development, we find that parents are not as quicker. They're not as quick to seek help with the development as they are for the boy child. So, for example, if a boy child is not able to grasp, he's not starting to talk, and he starts talking at a much later stage, people want to seek a little bit of help. They want some advice around that. But for the girl child, they tend not to. Then we find also with schooling, in early childhood, we find that boys are more diagnosed with something like ADHD, childhood mental health disorders. ADHD, we find it's more common with boys, and it's diagnosed more often with boys, often because with girls, it shows itself separately. So it manifests itself with some different symptoms. And that way, the girls are not actually being diagnosed. And if they are not being diagnosed, then they are not being able to be assisted with this condition and with this disorder. So ADHD, how it can impact the girl also, it affects the time management, it affects their sense of organization, the ability to make decisions. At a young age, they have the ability to make decisions. So ADHD impacts that, even their memory, their working memory. So when they are learning in school, they're struggling to grasp that, they're struggling to remember. Emotional regulation also gets affected. And oftentimes, because with ADHD with boys, most people, they tend to recognize certain hyperactivity behavior. They recognize aggressiveness. So parents they are more concerned for boys' behavior. However, with girls, you find that it may It tends to be more verbal. Girls focus a bit more on themselves, so they have low self-esteem. They withhold a lot of what they're feeling. It's much harder to notice these symptoms. So this can lead to severe problems down the road because they are sort of not given the tools to manage what they're struggling with from a young age. Oftentimes people only in their adulthood they then realize that they had this condition all along, and it had impacted on their learning, it had impacted on their functional relationships as well. So that's one of the things that we've picked up with children in early childhood. Then of course childhood is a foundation for the future, so we build on childhood. So if we shift a little bit over to adolescence, so from this childhood, as we're building our children's skills and their functioning, we want them, of course, to be able to be a bit more advanced when they are now adolescents. However, girls, we find that girls in adolescence, they experience quite a bit of challenges as well. It's often not recognized or it's minimized, especially relating to hormones, fluctuating hormones. It can often be misunderstood. So the adolescent challenges and the adolescent the struggles, it tends to be misunderstood and not really given the space. So young girls, when they start their first period, for example, when they're getting it's coming along regularly. However, during that period of time, they may be feeling extremely sick or whatever specific impact it's having on them, and they are still expected to function optimally. They are not given the space, perhaps within the school environment or within the home environment, to take some time out. Their pain, the physical pains that they're experiencing, it's minimized. They're expected to just perform and do whatever else they're supposed to be doing without due regard for the fact that some people, they really have severe periods and their period pains and the requirements there. What we also find in social factors around that time, especially in our more underprivileged communities, period poverty. So young girls don't have access to the items that they need for their periods, example, sanitary pads. So that then hinders them. They stay away from school for maybe a week, a month, and they are then left behind. They don't have the opportunity to catch up in school. So you then find that boys have an added advantage there, and there's no real provision made for girls to be able to catch up with that. We also find that with adolescent girls, if we look a little bit at their own, their well-being, their development also, they possibly develop things like low self-esteem. They start developing maybe eating disorders, anxiety, depression. It can become quite prevalent for girls. Uh, and then it develops into it carries on into adulthood. So we have covered certain topics through our programs with you, and things like even self-harm. We've realized how people start developing it, especially women and young girls. They start developing it in childhood or adolescence, and they carry it over then into adulthood. So oftentimes, again, the struggles, the challenges are not recognized by our communities and our families, and young women are then put under a lot of pressure to carry on and to minimize these struggles. So what we find then again is that it manifests itself on the inside with withdrawal, difficult interactions, poor relationships. They may be vulnerable they may be vulnerable to older men who will then target them for their own means. We find that adolescent girls also, they are more vulnerable to men who are offering them financial rewards for a sexual relationship. Statutory rape also occurs at that time. We find that oftentimes this is because the young girl, a combination of factors, social factors also, so where the family is struggling and this girl has a bit of pressure on her, she feels that she wants to not be a burden on her family, and then also self-esteem factors, because the attention of these older men, unfortunately, then she's more vulnerable to it, relating perhaps to her self-esteem or the lack of support that she gets, or even the lack of family role models and healthy relationships that she's never really seen. So we find that young women are a lot more susceptible to harmful relationships, to gender-based violence in their relationships as adolescents even, and eating disorders as well. And oftentimes families struggle to face this. So families struggle to support you through the eating disorder, or families struggle to support their child through perhaps self-harm or becoming suicidal because of a combination of all the factors that they're experiencing, being misunderstood. And then without having family support, it can impact even more on your mental health, and it can then cause even greater struggles, continued suicide attempts. Okay.
Mm.
Then, if we go to young adult women, one of the most common mental health problems that they struggle with is depression. Twice as many women experience depression than men, and oftentimes they again don't seek help for it, or they don't get the correct support. It's sort of minimized, and they're expected to carry on with daily life. They're expected to fulfill all their roles, and they're expected to meet the family's expectations. And sometimes young women are now, they are parents themselves. So they're expected to continuously care for the child without the correct support. You often find also that when a couple get when a couple is expecting a child and the relationship doesn't work out, automatically the child stays with the mother, and she doesn't always get the support from the father. He may provide financially, but of course, I mean, you need more than money to raise a child. You need time and effort and attention and practicalities around raising a child. So the mother has all of that on her. And the co-parenting relationship is quite poor. So again, social support is very minimal for a woman in very difficult conditions. And things like this can affect her. It can cause depression, it can cause anxiety. Again, people may think that they want a way out. These women may think that they're not getting support. It's not worth living. Life is so very hard. Especially financial struggles can also greatly contribute to people's mental health. Because if financially you're struggling, oftentimes we don't take the time out to focus on our mental health, because we are basically in survival mode. We're thinking about eating. We're thinking about our children need to eat. We're thinking about a roof over our heads. So all of that can severely impact our mental health. And in many communities, there's still stigma around saying you are depressed. In the Muslim community, oftentimes depression is not recognized. Depression is seen as you just have weak iman, and you just need to strengthen your iman, and you're going to be absolutely fine. You don't need any other support. You don't have to tell people about it. So there's still quite a bit of stigma that we are dealing with. And then women are not diagnosed with this, and they struggle on their own. And you find then that they will struggle with parenting. If you're not okay inside mentally, if you are struggling, you are most likely also going to struggle with your child, with parenting your child. And then the world sort of starts becoming a lot more difficult, and you will struggle to function in this world, struggle to cope with all the challenges going on. So then often women feel that they are on their own, and there's no support for them, and there's no recognition of their struggle. That is also why you find for young women, when they find a sisterhood, when they find a group of support, they cling to it. They tend to really, really take a lot of, get some benefit from it. So they really want to nurture that relationships that benefit them, because they are exposed to so much harmful relationships. And so when they have that group of women who can support them, you find that there's amazing things that can happen. And there's a lot of healing that can happen just by spending time with women who are not necessarily therapists. They don't have to be counselors, but they are a supportive group of women. They can be mentors, and they can be friends, they can be family. But when we find that support, you find in that mental health also improves, or people are willing to take the step to go and seek help for mental health when they have support of others.
Mm-hmm.
What we also find in anxiety is quite prevalent amongst young women also, especially in today's climate. South Africa's climate also, I'm not sure if many other people can relate to this, but it's just we're bombarded with a lot that's going on. There's a lot of difficulty that we're surrounded with. If it's not the financial difficulties, it's our social difficulties, it's crime, it's our families, it's there's just so much going on. So there's a lot of anxiety that people are experiencing. There's a lot of pressure on women to keep the family together. There's a lot of pressure on women to provide where other people are not able to provide. So, for example, if your sister has children and she's not able to provide for them, then the responsibility falls on the family itself. And oftentimes it's the women of the family who have to take a lot of that responsibility because men are possibly, they're not present, or they've been struggling themselves for years trying to find employment, etc. So women then you find that women tend to make a plan. They'll try to do sort of something to try and get an income, whichever way they can. So also young adults, there's quite physical changes, biological changes, pregnancy, mental health in pregnancy. It's quite significant for women, especially during pregnancy. There's just a lot that goes on, and what we find
Mm.
oftentimes with pregnancy, birth experience can be quite difficult in the South African environment also. Oftentimes our healthcare facilities, they are under strain, and women don't necessarily get the best of experiences in many of our healthcare facilities, and that actually can impact also on postpartum health. Many people are susceptible to postpartum depression, comes about after birth. And when we have postpartum depression, it's quite prevalent actually. What we've seen in the calls that we get, it's actually quite prevalent and across the spectrum. So even women who have wonderful birth experience, some of them tend to also have it. So postpartum depression oftentimes is a result of hormonal fluctuation, and as you know, with pregnancy, hormones are at elevated levels. So after birth, then hormonal fluctuation. So there's quite a bit of a letdown after, as the hormones are starting to balance itself out again. So oftentimes, postpartum depression symptoms include things like strong mood swings, anxiety, often crying for no real reason, struggling to sleep, and feeling very overwhelmed. People then feel guilty. The mothers feel guilty about how they're feeling, and they struggle to bond with their newborn. They struggle to connect. So it's a very, very real experience, and it can be harmful if it's not addressed. I can't say that it's just going to go away on its own. I really can't. I cannot say that. One other more rare condition that women experience also after birth is postpartum psychosis. So I've read about it, but we haven't. I can't say that we've had cases also. It's quite rare where there's actual psychosis, confusion, disorientation, hallucination after birth. And that requires intense therapy by a mental health professional. So you would definitely need to seek help for that. Because with postpartum psychosis, people can even seek to harm their child, all due to the psychosis. Okay, so that is something that women across childbirth age, they may also experience that. Um, what we also find also is substance use disorders amongst women. So women with these conditions are often then they, as a means of coping with these conditions and trying to cope with life through these conditions, through your anxieties, your depressions, your your PMS, your hormonal conditions, they may be susceptible to substance use disorders. We find that women tend to struggle with substance use disorder, and when they find that women who use it, they become more dependent faster. So their progression through dependence, it's a lot more faster than men, and they find it much harder to quit. So you find a lot of times we have men who are dependent on substances, and they'll tell you that they have quit without seeking intervention, or they've quit on their own, and 3 years they've been clean and they're managing on their own. We find that women struggle with that aspect, and they become quite overwhelmed with it. And then they get additional stresses, so additional social stresses, childcare, family care, etc., gender-based violence, and they use substances to sort of help them through that as a coping mechanism. It's of course a harmful and a deadly coping mechanism, but they find that that women are a lot more susceptible to that. We also find that what's now recently been quite popular in terms of diagnosis is borderline personality disorder. It's relatively new. It's been around for a while, but it's relatively new as an actual disorder on its own. Borderline personality, the symptoms are, we look at instability in behavior, instability in mood, relating also to people's their sense of self-worth and how it impacts on their relationships. So we find that a lot of women are actually diagnosed um, with this condition when they actually do seek help with it. for it. So women are more likely to be diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder. Um, and then, of course, as we get older, then women who are going through menopause can have a very, very strong impact on your mental health as well. It can also impact how you relate to you people you were previously very connected with, for example, your spouse. Um, you find that menopause also it's impacted also by other stresses. So things like change in financial circumstances, perhaps your relationship is broken down, now we're going through a middle-aged divorce. So it can really, it can heighten the difficulties and the mental health difficulties around menopause. And again, menopause also, it's a lot of times, especially in the workplace, it's sort of minimized. There's no space for this in the workplace. And the changes are not fully understood. The physical changes, yes, I think most people are aware of that, but then the impact it will have on your emotional well-being, it's not fully discussed. So it's a topic that we would really need to go through. I think we need to do a special focus on that one as well. So that's just some of the conditions that I think women are going through that will impact their mental well-being and their mental health. And as you can see, these are quite serious disorders that really have an impact on your life, on your well-being, how you interact with other people, the connection that you hold with the world around you. It really can affect it. And like I said earlier, also a lot of the times with women, the symptoms manifest itself quite differently.
Hmm.
So then you would need a therapist to really be able to understand that these symptoms are still part of the disorder, and therefore you would need to treat it as a unique case. So it cannot be
Hmm.
minimized. We always encourage doctors also not to minimize people's physical feelings because it's going to impact on their well-being, the emotional and mental well-being, and that can also make or break how somebody is going to approach treatment if they actually have, if they actually want to continue with treatment, if they feel that this treatment is connecting with them or not. Because a lot of times, if our clients don't feel connected to the treatment, if they don't have buy-in, they're just going to leave it. So we always try to tailor make our interventions with our clients to be unique to their experience. And we try, like I said earlier, we do not minimize every little bit, every little feeling that you're feeling. It is important and it has an impact on your well-being.
Hmm. Right. And what I've noticed from what you've mentioned is that it seems like it becomes a pattern if it's not dealt with, especially from childhood. If it's not dealt with from there, then it develops into another condition in adolescence, and then another condition as a young woman, as a woman in her middle ages, and as an older woman also. So it's somewhere along the lines these issues needs to be dealt with, and we have to actually start with the girls from a young age. And also one thing that we didn't really get into is health flare-ups during menopause and how can these be managed. But I see that time is not on our side, so I guess we have to find another day where we can tackle mental health flare-ups in menopause and in older women. So inshallah, perhaps we can look at that on another day. But for now, shukran so much for your time once again, Shuhaida, and for unpacking women's health through the different stages of life. And it's definitely something that we need to continue talking about. And now that it's Women's Month, even more and even more aggressive.
Now, Afan, it's always a pleasure. And if anybody would like to have continue the discussion with me further, they're welcome to contact us at the office 011 373 8080.
Right. Shukran and have a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum. That was Shuhaida Adam, social worker at Islamic Careline. And like she mentioned, if you want to continue the conversation, if you would like assistance on any other topic, you can call them on 011 373 8080. And you can also Google them to find out more information about the services they offer as well as where they are situated. You are listening to the Mid Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Mara Makonda. We will be right back.